Snow fell so fine it was more like the memory of snow, a sift of brightness that seemed to hang in the air before choosing its place. The courtyard stones drank it in with their usual stubbornness, and the chimneys of the great keep breathed steam like old giants caught in the act of sighing. From the godswood, where the red-tinged leaves rode the cold wind like fluttering hands, the scent of iron and sap threaded the sharper, cleaner perfume of frost. Winterfell in winter was a living thing, a never-tiring animal with warm blood beneath a thick pelt, and it had learned to share some of that warmth with those who endured inside its weathered bones. Saren Stark stood in leathers lined with lamb's wool, the hood thrown back so the powder could sprinkle her hair, and watched the enormous creature that had taken up the eastern side of the bailey as if the stones and the towers were an arrangement of furniture made for its convenience. A Shrith had folded her wings and curled the long muscle of her body into what would have been a coil had she been much smaller. One of her horns had a notch in it where metal had tried and failed to teach her humility. Winter made smoke of every breath she exhaled. The snow hissed on her skin when it landed and melted, rolling off as beads that fell and steamed the slush beneath her. Saren's hands smelled of singed fleece and the sharp tang of the oils the stable boys had brought up from the stores. One golden, slow, heavy with fat rendered from cattle, meant to be rubbed over leather. Another darker, spicier, made of currant kernels and pounded juniper to keep rust from blades. She rubbed both into the lines at the joints of a Shritha's foreleg where flake and ash sometimes gathered, working the oil with strong fingers until the scales took on a deeper sheen, so fine you might have thought the stone itself had breathed and softened under her touch. The dragon was quiet while it went on, lids half lowered over eyes the color of river ice in a deep bend where the current doesn't quite flow the way you think it will. Every so often a Shrith moved, not away, but toward the pressure, the way one leans into the hands that work a knot in a shoulder. Then the eye would flick, the slit widen, and Saren would look back into something that was not quite a reflection. It came as impressions, as always, the language of a creature whose thoughts were too old for words. Heat, an impression of walls cracking as sap runs under bark in thaw and finds an old wound, and the pressure has to go somewhere. Fire, not as an idea or a tool, but as a field in which life shapes and takes breath, as urgent and indifferent as wind. A taste of salt, sudden and sharp, as if a wave had broken high on a black stone. The brief, green-drenched sensation of the godswood when water rose warm from the earth and left fog in its wake. Beneath all of it, the steady sensation of Saren herself, known the way a hand knows a glove it has worn to softness or a wolf knows the trail between den and stream. When the dragon's attention passed through her, Saren closed her eyes and stood quiet beneath it, bones ringing with a harmony she told no one about and perhaps could not have if she tried. "Hungry, is she?" Brenna called from the doorway of the breadroom, where warmth spilled over the lintel and vanished into the cold like laughter into a silence that had been waiting to swallow it. Brenna had wrapped a scarf around her hair and brought a tray that steamed and smelled of fat. "If she'll take mutton, there's stew enough to make a river of gravy." Saren shook her head, smiling without showing teeth. "She took a hind this morning, near the ridge. It made the ravens curse me." "At least ravens speak clear," Brenna said, setting the tray on a bench and peering at a Shrith as if to see if the dragon had grown since yesterday. "Not like those crows in the rookery, always with remarks they think no one hears." "She'll fly at dusk," Saren said. "She wants the last of the light." Brenna nodded once, the way she did when she decided a thing made sense whether it did or no. Her thumb traced a circle on the tray's rim, and her gaze lingered on the coals in the brazier someone had dragged to stand near a Shritha's flank, as if the dragon herself might be cold. "It keeps my hands from remembering," she said to the fire, and then looked up and smiled too brightly. "Come in for a bowl while the kettle is hot enough to scold you. The boys'll fight over who carries your boots to dry." "Leave the boots," Saren said. "I promised the kennels I'd look at the wounded hound." "You promised the kennels you'd do the maester's work, is what you did," Brenna sniffed. "Most ladies leave the broken-legged things to men with chains clatter around their throats. I say that kindly. Your lord father's at table. Corin was there with his book and one of those says it's important faces. I didn't like the look. You know that look? When someone has written something down twice and wants you to remember both versions. I know the look, Saren said, and in her chest something sank, a weight taking its proper place. I'll come in a little. Tell them to keep their soup honest. I'll be along. Ashritha's head shifted as Saren turned, the sharp plate of the skull moving with a sound like a knob of stone dragged over a frozen pond. When the dragon's breath puffed out, it gusted against Saren's shoulder and lifted a few snowflakes. The impression she sent was simple. A pull toward the godswood, a dim sense of the weirwood's face, the old cut mouth, the bleeding leaf hair. Yes, Saren thought back. Yes, dusk and the wood and the frost. The old gods had given nothing that day but silence. Still, she'd ask again. Sometimes silence changed its shape. The great hall had never looked so human as it did after you'd stood near a dragon. The benches full of men in thick layers, the women standing at the long tables like captains of ships, the scattered dew. GS with their hopeful gaze and thumping tails. These were the things of mortals, soft and noisy and hungry, and they were worlds of their own, full of small triumphs and deep griefs and the slow turning of days. The soot mark on the west wall where a torch had once gone wrong had not been scrubbed away, out of respect for the fact that mistakes become part of a place. Tapestries warmed the stone and drank the draft that came when the wind had its way with the shutters. On the dais, Lord Talon Stark sat with his shoulders wrapped in a cloak whose fur had gone coarse with smoke and age. He looked older when he was still. He had the face of a man who had walked through many winters, and each had borrowed something from him he would not have parted with if asked. In movement he looked as he always had. Spare, contained, the hint of a smile sometimes when he watched the things that pleased him. The way a boy lifts a cup bigger than his hands, determined not to spill. The way a hawk sits on a perch and has a mind for nothing but the accounts of air. The way a daughter cleans the hinge on a dragon's foreleg because no one else will think to. Saren slid onto the bench near the dais, not at the top table, never there unless asked, but where her father could see her without turning his head. The habit of their house was a form of tenderness. Corin the Maester had the book open and his finger on a line as if he were catching a flea. He had silver in his beard and ink in the creases of the hands he lifted in greeting. "I've written a letter," he said without preamble, because he'd never learned the lazy steps of small talk and no one had the heart to teach him. Two, rather. One to Old Town, one to Dragonstone. I should like your Lord Father's seal on both. To what end? Talon asked gently. If I put my wolf's head on a piece of paper today, it should be for more than ornament. Dragonstone writes again and again, Corin said, and the last raven carried a tone I did not like. He tapped the page with a brisk fingernail. They ask what is to be done about the dragons you have stolen, my lord. They ask when you will return them, as if they were hounds that chased into your yard and charmed your daughters. Saren watched her father's mouth as he considered. His beard had more white in it than last winter. And your letters, Maester? I reminded them of two truths, Corin said, and the word truth sat on his tongue like something he both trusted and distrusted at once. 1. A dragon chooses. This is not a thing we arrange, any more than we persuade the wind to blow. 2. If they wish to claim theft, they must be ready to argue law. The old records say nothing of blood. Valyrian steel cares nothing for the hand that holds it. The steel remembers fire, not lineage. If law truly binds them, they'll find it binds them more tightly than us. Maester, Talon said softly, law is a river that runs whichever way the lords digging trenches decide, and all rivers in the south run toward King's Landing. Or did. The word hung. Even the dogs stopped their tails for a heartbeat. The Red Keep had been a place out of songs and nightmares for those who lived their lives where snow was as familiar as bread. People had learned to say its name with a careful mouth, the way one speaks an old pain that is not theirs and never quite was. To speak of it now was to pick up a knife you had used and washed and put away before supper, only to find it in your hand again. Saren kept her gaze on the stew the boy set in front of her. She had an old habit of bringing up the browns and onions from the bottom so the spoon got a bit of everything. The quiet made the scrape of spoon on bowl very loud. She thought of the roofs in King's Landing, the way they had caught like tinder because they were tinder. She thought of the white stone of the high towers sweating and crazing, the mortar turning black with heat, then red, then white again as the flame roared and roared until it took people's names and blew them into ash you could step in. She thought of Ashritha's great ribs moving under her legs as she leaned, the way you lean when a horse clears a wall and the world falls away. She thought of the smell of cedar when a beam is cut, how fresh it is, as if the wood had just been born and now you intend to ask it to carry weight for 100 years. She had wanted to be precise. Precision had not been what fire was. I write to Old Town for knowledge, Corin went on, filling in the silence as if it were a crack in the wall that would let in cold later if left unattended. The old texts hedge and prevaricate, but there is something here I feel the edge of. Dragons in snow. Dragons bending low before a fleet of leaves that never fall. Dragons choosing those not bred to the language of their bones. There is confluence here. I would know it properly before someone in a crown tells us what it is and makes us believe it. I write to Dragonstone to say, come north if you will. Come sit by the springs and put your hands out to the steam and speak softly to the beasts you once knew. You can tell a true thing to a dragon or not at all. What if they come with steel instead? Rowan, Talon's heir, asked from the end of the table. He had his mother's cheekbones and the letters of patience carved on his forehead. Once, he would have gone south to foster. Instead, he had learned his father's house inch by inch in the long shadow of a dragon's wing. He had a lad of 5 and a daughter who would be a handful before winter was done, and the fear in his voice was threaded with the economy of a man who knows how many ways there are to break a life. The Targaryen prince is not given to soft approaches. Then we light fires in the watchtowers and call the bannermen, Talon said, the way a man says, and when it storms we wear cloaks. But if we can keep more children from running under the fire, that is what we do first. Saren did not look. If Rowan's voice had been fear alone, something reckless would have risen in her, but it was too plain. He wanted to keep his son's hands whole and the girl's eyes clear. He wanted the men who had sworn to him to live long enough to be old and tell lies about their prowess at the tables of their children's children. And he wanted, quietly and without asking if it was noble, not to bury anyone else because the world loved a story about blood. She took a spoonful of stew and let it sit on her tongue. Brinna had done something with cloves, just enough to make the fat from the meat sit comfortably with the oats. It felt good to have something in her mouth that was not ash. Darion Waters arrived with the next snow. He came on a rangy mare with a coat that had gone from bay to something like the color of molasses pressed through silt, and the mare did not approve of Winterfell smells or its noises or the idea of staying anywhere that was not the road. He had the air of men who have done more than they'll say for coin, and he had a musician's hands, fine-boned and quick. It was the hands that Brinna saw first when he slipped from the saddle, because her mother had been a woman who played a fiddle at feasts and sometimes, in the afternoons, for herself. He wore his collar turned up and shook the snow out of it as if assaulted. From where? The guard at the gate asked. He had been sent down by Rowan because he had the fewest opinions and one of the better eyes. I've ridden north from the Black River and the stinking city, Darion said, too tired to phrase better. It's a wonder you don't smell it in your cups up here. Since the wind changed some nights, the guard allowed, and shifted the spear in his hand so that it stood upright and still and appropriate. His breath came out white around the edges of his houndstooth scarf. Name, Darion, he said, and then the windows and names and histories came into play, and he saw that the guard would have the story before letting him pass. Waters. If I had a singed coin for every bastard cursed by what the Crownlands calls him on a legal paper, I could buy a ship and a cargo to sink with it. I sang in half the taverns in the fish district that didn't fall. I slept in a little loft over a cooper who snored like a night wind in a broken shutter. Then the dragons came. Dragons? The guard said in the careful tone that is not disbelief, only the equivalent of asking the weather to repeat itself. And the thick of me wants to be a liar and make a song of it, Darion said, looking at his hands. But I have found I do not like lying anymore. Takes a bite from you if you do it too long, and when you need that peace, it's not there. The dragons came, and I stood in the window because I am a creature who needs to see what kills him. Also because I thought it might be beautiful. He looked up, gray eyes opening as if there were a small lamp behind them that someone turned up. It was. It was beautiful, and I have not yet forgiven it. Shall I keep talking? Or would you rather I sit by the fire and hold my tongue until I feel my fingers again? The guard's gaze flicked to the place above the gate where the carved wolf looked as if it were listening. We have stew, and a table that's seen 1,000 elbows and a few that don't belong. You can sit and not talk for a bit. Then we'll see. Kindness? Darian murmured, and the mare rolled her eye as if she disapproved of any word that was not oats. It seems thicker in the air here. Does it freeze? Everything freezes, the guard said, and clapped the singer on the shoulder lightly. The way a man does who has learned the exact pressure that counts for comfort and the pressure that counts for challenge. Inside. Then you can tell the steward whether you're staying the night or longer. What you can't afford, someone will put a word to. Darian drank his first cup of northern ale so fast he didn't taste it, and the second slowly because he wanted to. The warmth in his middle softened the sharp of the days behind him and let his mind range back in that way memories sometimes do when the body believes itself safe. Not in order, not as a ledger, but as a series of images that are as much sensation as they are sight. He did not tell the hall the shape of the dragon's shadow on the street, the way people had thrown themselves flat and then sprung up to run in whichever direction their blood told them to run. He did not say the first thing he'd smelled was the fat from the roast geese turning to something that was not food anymore. He did not say the thing that woke him sweating each night since had not been the roar, not the thunder of wings as the dragon banked to turn again over the palace, but the precise instant when the heat had pushed through his shutters and made the candle above his bed gutter and die as if it were ashamed to pretend. What he said, when the quiet between two songs had grown large enough to fill, was simple. They burned the king's house, he said, and the phrase came out like a child's because he lacked the energy to frame it as history. They burned the Red Keep as if it were no more than a wicker man set up for a festival. I don't know who sat the chair with all the knives in it in the morning. I don't know who sat it when the sun went down. I know who was on the dragon. They had a northern face. No one in the hall made a sound. It had been said already in whispers and in guesses, the way one says a thing to friends in the yard and watches the wind carry it. To hear it from a stranger's mouth, from a mouth that still tasted of the south, made it a different kind of truth. Darian's gaze went over them and stopped on a young woman standing near the side door, where the cold licked the heat as if to tease it. She wore a jerkin too big for her, someone else's cast-off, but she had sewn the sleeves down to fit her arms with a care that told you she was the sort who did not give a rattling cuff. She held a bowl with both hands and offered it to a girl of 8 whose hands were red with the beginnings of chilblains. Her hair was dark, braided in a single rope and coiled at the nape. Her eyes were down, fixed on her purpose. She had the look of someone you would not notice until suddenly you would notice nothing else. Snow, some would have called her. And because songs are tricks we play on ourselves to keep from seeing the whole of a thing at once. His mind wrote a line about bastards and bowls and the knights of the north that he would later despise. Mara had spent most of the afternoon taking what the kitchen would keep and selling the rest in the yard for coppers, which Brinna let her keep because she pretended not to see. She had a knack for keeping accounts, for making 3 nails do the work of 5, for finding a clean piece of rope where most would swear there was none. When she woke, she liked to count the number of breaths it took for the frost to melt at the corners of the window, and if she guessed right, she felt something akin to joy. She had been a child flung into the space between houses and had found handholds. Once, when she still had more questions than years, she had asked if she might stand in the godswood after supper. A boy had told her not to. The old gods don't have time for baseborn girls, he'd said. They've old blood to listen to. But the godswood did not keep a list by the gate, and the hot spring sent up its fog whether you were wanted or not, so she had gone. She went now because the fog was a kind of blanket no one else could steal from you, and because her feet knew the way over the roots in the dark. The snow had silver in it under the gone light. The heart tree waited with its mouth cut into it like a wound that had learned not to bleed. The black pool reflected no stars because the steam wrote its own sky. She put her palm on the damp bark and let the chill of it travel up her arm because unlike most chills it seemed to do a good thing. It made her skin feel intimate with itself, as if the boundaries between her and the cold were a kind of handshake they had agreed upon. The first time she had felt the attention, she had thought a hawk had looked at her. It had the weight and the curiosity of a predator's gaze. There had been no sound but the wet drip of the spring's mouth and the muffled voices of men carrying wood. Then the air changed. That was the only way she could say it, to herself or to no one. The air changed, as if a vein of warmer current had run through a stream and then been pulled back by whatever caused it. She had felt the hair on her forearms lift. Her skin had shifted with a recognition she had no words for and could only call, "Oh." Now it came again. She did not turn, because you don't when you know you are being studied by something that does not take much to feel provoked. She let her eyes go soft, the way she did when she was counting by feel. The ripple lay across her shoulders first, then down her spine. She could sense the shape of it as one senses the shape of a large wave behind you when you know the sea and have swum under and through it 100 times. Slow, slow. The whisper of leather and something that was not leather. Something like stone but too alive for stone. Something like embers that had slept under ash and now woke and dreamed. When the breath came, it carried the smell of hot iron and the faintest sweetness of burnt honey. It curled around her ear the way the wind does at the corner of a house. And it said nothing she could translate but everything she understood. It said, "This. You." It said, "Not because of your blood. Because you stood still and your mind did not jump away when mine pressed back." It said, "We travel north when it feels right. Not because someone opens a door and calls us good names." It said, "Put your hand there." Mara turned. The dragon's face was a map of angles and smooth planes, a geometry a mason could study and never master. Vesperis had scales the color of smoke on the edge of a hearthstone. In the places where the light from the keep hit them, they slid toward silver like a river under a winter moon. The eyes were cool and then not. They flared with a heat you felt in your cheeks, as if you had been drinking, and then became slow again. There was scar tissue along the left side of the jaw, a long pale rope where some spear or brave thing had once made its point and then been forgotten by one of the two participants. The dragon lowered her head until the knife-thin edge of her jaw was level with Mara's chest. "Here," Mara whispered, "because it is a thing we do to make ourselves brave. Pretend we're asking a child whether they'd like salt on their porridge." She put her hand between two plates where the skin was softer and not less alive. The heat was a marvel. She had learned cold all her life, learned the places of it in the keep and in her bed and in the way people looked away. The heat through her palm was not a thing that pushed rudely. It was a welcome. It made her shoulder go heavy with relief. Vesperis released a long, slow breath. Steam lifted from the edge of the pool and drifted over them as if to hide them from someone who had taken up a spy's work in the moon. Saren watched from the shadow of the birch near the edge of the godswood, where the last of the daylight gripped the white bark and would not yet let go. A shrith had come silent as a storm that knows its path, making no more noise in the snow than a fox making prints. The dragon stopped two flapping of her ankles away and tilted her head. Something passed between the two dragons. Not words, not anything like the touches Saren knew with a shrith, but a recognition like the one that sometimes passed between two women bearing water from the well in a morning so cold it made your teeth hurt, who do not need to be told the other has woken in the dark to feed a child. Then a shrith's attention too. Rened to Saren, her rider, and the rope between them pulled tight in a way that made Saren's breath catch. Heat from a shrith, the sensation of falling upward, the rip and draft of wings, then the insistence that was almost a command and almost a question. "Why did you not tell me there were others like us whose hands remember warmth the way they remember hunger?" Saren, breath frosting, blinked. "I did not know," she sent as much intention as message. But she knew better now. She should have known. The magic that lay under Winterfell like a spring was not gentle, but it was generous. Things woke in its steam. Talon listened to Corrin read the replies and said nothing that night. The ravens had come with a clatter and a falling of soot from the rookery rafters, indignant to be disturbed in this cold, and they had left again as if duty were a thing they did with reluctance and a precise measure of contempt. The Old Town letter had been fine and very fine, a spider web spun with such care you could see the tension in each strand when a messenger fly tried to push through. It said, Knowledge is a house with many doors, but for coin we might lend you the key to one of them. It also said, the matter of dragons is sensitive, as if you were asking after a cousin who has debts, and it had, under the careful phrases, the intact haughtiness of men who believe they speak not for themselves, but for a great mother who eats books for breakfast. The letter from Dragonstone spoke with a more human mouth. It had been written by a hand that had not yet learned not to grip a quill too tightly. Said, "My prince will come north." It said, "The fire in our bones is fading because the fire in our house has been quenched by storm and arrogance and luck." It said, "If there is a reason your ice can cradle our end of things, I would know it, not to punish it, but to ask it for mercy." Said more simply still, "I am afraid." It bore the smear of ash where someone touched it with a thumb before the ink was dry. "Send for more oats," Talon said into the room where Corin sat, and the candles made rivers on the tabletop. He had the look he had when he took a map and turned it so that the north was not at the top. "And salt, if we can get it, from White Harbor. There will be many mouths before long." "You believe they will come," Corin said, both statement and question. "I believe in hunger more than in law," Talon said, and his smile then was tired and unforgiving. "If they come for war, we will know it in the way their horses leave their droppings and their men leave their cups. If they come as men who have lost something they believed was theirs by grace, we will smell it as soon as they ask for water. In any case, we will be ourselves." The next day broke all at once, the way days sometimes do rather than begin by degrees. The sky had lain low on the roofs like a blanket someone had thrown over a boy too tall for his bed. And then suddenly the blanket was gone and the air had the clarity of glass. You could see from the top of the keep to the world's far elbow where the line of black pines and the line of white hills met and kept each other honest. People came out of the south gate with fingers red from the pump and laughed without meaning to, because light in winter is its own kind of courage. Rowan made his rounds and kept the smirk off his face when he saw that the icicles at the eaves had grown so long his son could stand on a stool and touch one and be exalted for doing so, and then sharply told the boy not to do it again because beauty falls. Brenna burned her tongue twice because she would not leave the pot unattended while people poured their cups and told her their opinions as if she had asked. Corin went to the rookery with a handful of melted fat and put it on the sill so the birds would have something to peck at that was not his ears. A shrith went up at mid-morning with Saren on her back and shook snow from the roofs as she took the air. People stepped away from the gust of it with exclamations that tasted of the hot cider in their mouths. And down in the yard by the kennels, Mara stood with Vesperis and brushed the dragon's neck with a sacking brush she had sworn had no more use. It should have been the day it was, long and ordinary, the sort of day that houses make their lives from without noticing. Instead, by midday, men in iron hats were at the gate. They had the look of men who had ridden long and slept short and taught their horses that no kindness was to be expected. Their cloaks bore a spray of salt, and their cheeks the kind of chapping that comes when wind makes up for a lack of manners by being all around you. Their leader sat straight and had a beard that wanted combing but had not been told. His eyes were light as if something had bleached them from the inside. The words at the gate were careful, because the men of the north were never impolite when courtesy would do, and those of the south had learned to mimic courtesy when war was not their immediate purpose. The leader gave his name, Ser Layman Celtigar, and said, "I bear letters from Dragonstone and would speak with Lord Stark if there is heat for cold men and bread for bellies that have learned to pretend." And he gave the wolf on the gate a long look the way a man sometimes does at the crest he has been taught to respect and secretly resents for the time it wastes. He did not expect to see a dragon's eye looking at him over the wall. A shrith lifted her head slowly, so a man who needed to would have the hour between one heartbeat and the next to decide whether he could bear what was happening. Layman's horse threw up its head and blew, and one of Layman's men let a curse slip quiet through his teeth where he thought no one would hear. The snow on the wall slid in a soft rush when a shritha's breath swept it, and Layman, who thought of himself as a man not given to humiliation, had to wait for the sight of the scales and the long pea. Lated neck to stop rearranging what he thought was possible. He had seen dragons before. He had lived within sight of a keep carved by men who named their island after them and could not say the name of the stone without tasting smoke. But he had not seen one so at ease in snow, or so entirely uninterested in whether he existed. He had written the letter to Lord Stark through the night before last, under a candle that had guttered twice in a draught. He could not find and had wanted to curse for its waste. He had written, "I come because the prince cannot leave yet." He had written, "Those who rode dragon to your roof will face us and speak." He had written, "Do not mistake grief for weakness." He had not written, "We have less to lose than we did 2 months ago and so more to risk." He had not written, "My lord the prince cannot command the dragons the way his grandfather could," for even his grandfather could not command grief. He had not written, "Those of us who love the old things as they were are being asked to love them as they will be, and if we do not learn, we will be nothing." He would not now say any of this at the gate. He could not bear to have the words judged by farmers' sons who could tell you what kind of frost lay on a railing by touch. The hall took him and his men with the same politeness that had been on the lip of the gate. They were given places near enough the fire to feel it, but far enough that they could not mistake their place. The old wolf on the tapestry behind the dais seemed to be smiling in an unfriendly way. Laemond looked at it and decided that this was his hunger talking. Talon came down the steps more slowly than Laemond expected from a man with a dragon in his yard, and greeted him by name in a voice that had a kind of carrying gentleness that soldiers did not like. Saren stood to one side, her hair in a braid like a rope you trust your weight to. "We have a letter for you, my lord," Laemond said, and drew it out of the case he wore slung under his cloak. His hands shook. "That is Cold's mischief," Talon said with a small nod, as if acknowledging that too many things could be mistaken for too many other things. He broke the seal without ceremony and read. The prince's hand had improved in a day. It still bit the paper in places and ran in others, but it had learned the discipline of distance. "Do not lean so close into the thing you write that your breath smears it." He wrote, "We come because what is broken is not yours to mend, but you have stitched a tear in our cloth without asking leave, and now it is our shirt that sits whole and yours that puckers." He wrote, "When my grandfather rode, he bent no knees but his own and drove those who would not bend out of his halls. That was not strength. It was failure dressed up in finery." He wrote, "I ask you to stand in the steam with me and tell me if the warmth in your bones is the same as mine." He wrote, "If you lie, I will know it and call you thief and ride to take back what is mine. And if my dragon will not come, I will go on a boat and drown for pride's sake." He wrote, "I do not know what the old gods are. If they are trees, I ask them leave to say their names with a clean mouth. If they are not, I will put my hands on the bark anyway and hope that when I take them away some sap clings." Talon read twice, once as a lord and once as a father, and then set the letter down as if it might scald the table. He turned to Laemond. "Tell your prince he may come," he said. "Tell him he must. No one makes sense alone." Laemond's mouth opened and closed. He had expected to be refused first, expected to argue ground from a man who wished to keep his dignity polished and his floorboards untouched. He had prepared a speech that invoked the names of men whose statues stood in halls where boys came to swear and outgrew the habit of swearing. He had not prepared for a simple invitation. He bowed because he had always had that habit, and habits are the form of hope. After Laemond had been given a trencher and set to with his men and discovered that fat and oats could make a man forget to be angry for half an hour, Talon lifted his hand and Saren came close. "You flew," he said quietly, because he liked to put the truth before whatever came next. "I flew," she said, and the guilt that was not guilt because she would do it again if she could not be sure of a different outcome moved in her like a fish in a net. "Did you mean to burn the whole of it?" Talon's voice did not accuse or absolve. He was her father asking what kind of beast she had tried to make the world into and what kind it had become instead. "I meant to send a message," she said, and then laughed once, abruptly, because the words were ridiculous in her mouth. "That's coward's talk. I meant to end a thing. I meant to snatch from the mouth of the South a certainty that they could strike and never be struck. We got word that 3 days later the hand meant to move on White Harbor, that he had paid men to set fire under the gates and then cry out against the North when the fires were put out, that he had set aside coin to feed his mess and not ours. I believed." She stopped because belief had become a word too blunt for what she had had. "No," she said more carefully. "I had seen what they did to people they did not need, and I saw a quick cut to rot. I was not slow. Talon laid his hand on the table and let the weight of it sit there. His fingers were long and strong, men's fingers. They had ever learned tenderness, and they had cracked with cold and healed. We will not say it was right, he said, as if to himself. We will not say it was wrong. We will say it was power, used to end a thing that would have eaten men alive and then asked for more. Men will write songs. They always do. We will decide what men who do not sing should eat. Saren leaned down and put her head in her hands for a long moment, not because she was undone, but because it restored her. The SME, LL of Ash, always there, loosened in her throat. When she lifted her head again, Rowan had come and stood a little behind, where brothers stand because their love is complicated and they hope that's fine. He put his knuckles on the table. We'll have to set guards when the dragon sleeps, he said, all practical. Not against soldiers, against fools who'll throw knives because they're afraid. Brenna sent Mara to carry bowls to the newcomers under the watch of a boy with a sharp nose and a sense of humor too old for him, and Mara went without remark. But when she had handed the last of the trencher to the last of Layman's men and seen that he had remembered thank you, she went out into the yard to breathe something that was not other people's talk. Vesperis waited, her breath making a little cloud nearer as if she were trying to blush. The dragon lowered her head and breathed against Mara's breastbone. And Era wanted to cry the way you want to cry when someone says your name in a tone you've never heard from their mouth before. She laid her palm again where scale met skin and felt something pass through her like being recognized by a place rather than a person. Will you fly? A child asked. The voice came from behind a stack of bundled brush meant for the night. The boy had a nose run like a snail and eyes too big for his face. Miss, perhaps, she said, because you do not say yes to a child when you do not hold the days in your two hands. She is strong, and I am not foolish. If we do it, we'll do it when the air is soft enough to give and not break. If I fall off, you can have my shoes. The child considered this as if it were a serious bequest. Your shoes are small, he told her gravely. I have feet like my uncle's, and he can't find boots either. Then I'll leave you something else, she said, and Vesperis tilted her head and pushed her muzzle against Mara's shoulder as if to say, we do not fall off. We ride the places the air permits us and claim the ones it does not when we must. Night grew like fur, softly and thick. The torches along the walls came up one by one, and their light made little bowls of gold among the flakes that came down slower now, as if the sky were tired and ready to sleep. Men within the walls thought of wives, of children, of where their feet would be warm tonight. Men beyond thought of the distance yet to ride and whether there would be food when they reached the next fire. Corin sat with his silver links on his breast and wrote down what he knew, which was less and more than he would have liked. He wrote, dragons are warm. He wrote, the Godswood spring keeps steam in the air that tastes of iron. He wrote, the dragon put its head lower to the ground near the heart tree, eyes softer. He did not write. I stood in the fog and believed because he was careful with belief the way he was careful with his ink. Saren went up in the night, not to show anyone anything, but because a Shrith wanted the feeling of wing under stars. She wore a cloak that did nothing against the cold once they were high, and her cheeks went red with it and then numb, and it hurt to smile. She smiled anyway because the world around her was clean. She could see the lines of rivers where the ice had begun to glass. She could see the black of the wolves moving low in the forest, a little ripple here and there where something alive had to go on being alive. Ashritha's wing beats had their own pattern, a thing between heart and instrument, and Saren leaned into them, trusting what she was on the dragon's back the way you trust a boat if you've built it yourself. When she banked south and let sight run out to the far, beyond the place where the land turned to a stain in the air, what came was first grief and then something like relief that she could feel both. She held in her mind, for a breath, the picture of the red keep the way it had been that day. The glow so bright it made the roofs around it look like the excised interior of shadow, the tower breaking with a sound like a hand slapping water. The bits of stone that went up and then came down and skipped and fell and did not break because they were already broken in the way that matters. The line of the city wall, the way it caught and did not catch. The people like ants but not ants because ants' lives are ants' lives and deserve respect on their own terms. And then she pushed back, gently, the pull of that picture, the sticky of it, and insisted to herself that what lay below her now was her life. The sobbing of a man too drunk to remember why he sobbed, the small sweetness of a woman teasing her lover by not giving him something she had given him last night and keeping it to give differently later, the stray dogs chasing each other's breath in mad circles, the ring of a hammer, the lowing of a cow whose milk would be reminders to someone of their childhood in summer. She came down quiet. A shrift landed with the careful thump that made the snow on the wall fall, and Saren slid to the ground and stood there until her knees felt like her own again. She wanted to be alone. It was not, she had learned, the same thing as being lonely. She set off across the yard toward the bathhouse because steam called to her bones like an old friend. She found Mara under the arch of the bathhouse door, hands held out, turning them in the steam like meat a cook wants to brown evenly. Her face had changed since morning, only a little. Something around the mouth had softened. The eyes looked as if they had had an argument with the world and, for once, the world had given ground. Will she allow it? Saren heard herself ask, which was rude and a presumption and wholly necessary. Mara did not pretend to understand some things she did not. I think she has already decided, she said, and smiled at the thought. I am the slower one. My hands have learned too many other shapes. They are good with knives. They are good with thread. They are good why? Take bread. They have not yet learned wing. But I learn quick. I have had to. Saren liked the defiance that was in that last sentence and not in the ones that came before. When you go up, you'll want a strap around your thigh and a hook for the boot, so you can wedge yourself when her back dips. The cold will climb. Eat before you go. Your stomach will think it can't do both, fear and food, and it will choose fear if you let it. Don't let it. Breathe when she breathes. You'll know if you are in time because the world will slow down and you will think of nothing at all without losing anything you need to think. You will teach me? Mara said, not as a question. I will, Saren said, and in the Godswood the heart tree did not nod, because trees do not nod, but something in the steam seemed to move sideways instead of up. Darian played that night. He had meant not to. He had meant to let his fingers forget. Then someone, a boy with a nose too sharp and humor older than him, brought him a fiddle from a chest somewhere, and though 3 strings were stubborn and the bridge had seen better days, it yielded to hands that knew its bones. He began with a song that remembered the summer when the wheat had been so tall a man could stand in it and be waist-high to it, and the hall sighed as one because songs lie less than men. He played a quick tune after that, the sort that made the girls who worked with the meat grab each other's hands and do a step that had come from somewhere else but belonged here now. Then he played something he did not mean to, a long, slow lament that had a shape like a coastline, long stretches of sameness, and then a sudden inlet where you thought you could dock before the wind threw you out again. People did not speak over it. They stood and held bowls and let the tune go through them and settle somewhere they would not look at until day. Laymond listened as if he were being offered a thing he could not afford to refuse. He did not drink very much because he had known too many men who had failed to ride in the morning and found death in a ditch because of it. He watched Saren out of the corner of his eye because he had learned that the people who matter rarely sit where you expect. She did not sing. She did not lean toward the fire. She sat as if she were preparing to leave. Would the old king have done it? He heard a man near him whisper to his friend, because whispering makes us feel safe even when it does not do anything to the air. Would he have burned his own house to save his family, if he had believed that was what he needed to do? You ask a story to answer a thing a man would not tell you to your face, the friend said dryly. He would have done what the day gave him and damned tomorrow for being presumptuous. And then he would have made a joke. There. Now you have your ghost to argue with. Let me drink. Laymond thought of the prince's letter, of the smear of ash, of the anger that ran through the words like a vein, and the hope that ran beside it trying to catch up. He bowed his head and did not pray, because he did not know to whom or what to aim his asking. In the middle of the night, horses' hooves rang outside the southern wall, not in alarm, but with the tired rhythm of traveling men. The watchman called the sign, and the men at the postern learned the exchange and gave answers the way we do when we are just tired enough to be honest. Rowan came down with his cloak thrown over his nightshirt and a torch in his hand, and he looked like his father had the time he'd come upon 2 men gambling with unfair dice and had not called them fools, only taken the dice and shown them how to cut them properly, so they would lie evenly when life demanded they roll for keeps. The men who came through the postern wore the prince's colors, but they did not move like men wearing anything but their own skin. They had dust in their eyebrows as if they had forgotten they had eyebrows. The one at the front carried his helmet under his arm because it had rubbed his forehead raw 3 days ago and he had given up pretenses. Harry Hoare had pushed a cart when he was a boy because his father had been that sort of man, and he pushed now because the horse had fallen and a snowdrift had made a fool of the wheel and there was no else to do it. Rowan raised his torch to see his face and then had to lower it because light hurts in darkness. "You're in the right place," he said, because it was the truest thing he could think of, and sometimes men deserve that. "We'll make you hot inside and then you can hate us properly when your headaches come." Harry gave a bark of laughter that turned into a cough. "My prince," he said, "is a quarter day behind, because the sea found our boat too proud and sent it to the bottom before it could teach him weak knees. We came as fast as we could, banners tucked away, because what flag in the night will get you anything but a spear? I am told there is kindness here along with murder. I would test both." "You'll find it," Rowan said, "and you will put your prince by the fire where he can be watched without him knowing so. Which is to say, you will put him with the men he cannot help hearing. He will find there what he can and scorn what he must. That is what princes are for." Dawn made a white gold out of Winterfell's edges and pushed the night down into the wells, where it could sleep behind the taste of iron. The kitchens began to shout because there were soldiers and a prince somewhere on the road, which meant too much of something and too little of something else. Brenna measured the flour with a hand that had never seen a day without work and rolled her eyes when the novice spilled the salt. "You just invited trouble to come in and sit," and made the sign her mother had taught her, even though she would tell you she didn't believe in it. Saren stood at the rampart and watched the south. Ashrith had not slept. She had basked, eyes slitted as watching the walls hold their own pleased her. Vesperis lay with her jaw on Mara's boot, which was an invitation to tripping that Mara did not take. The dragons were both awake. That mattered more than the lamps being trimmed. Corin came up with a scarf knotted under his chin and frost in his eyebrow. "If men can be remade," he said without preface, "it will be because the world has given them a thing too strange to be managed, and they have learned to hold it without breaking it to prove they own it." "You want to write a book?" Saren said softly. "I want to write a page," he said. "A book is for after. Today I want to be precise. I want to say, a creature that remembers volcanoes put its face into falling snow and did not flinch because something in the snow smelled like an older home. I want to say, winter is not enemy to fire, not always. It is its patience, the container and not the emptiness. I want to say, a bastard girl laid a hand on history and did not burn. There, Saren said, and her breath clouded and then dispelled. A line of riders had crested the rise south of the mills and moved down carefully for the sake of their mounts. The sun caught on a helm with a dragoon on it, and for an instant the man who wore it looked like a piece of the thing he loved. They did not make any trumpeting out of the arrival. The south does such things sometimes. The north holds back. The men came into the yard, and at their head rode the prince. He had hair that did what it wanted, as if it had once been tamed by oil and now remembered too much weather. He had the posture of a man who had been dressed for too many years and had thrown his shirts at the wall and put on the one that did not require him to hold himself in. He dismounted with a grunt that was almost a laugh, and when he lifted his head to look at the shape of Ashrith against the white of the wall, he did not hide what it did to him. Saren stepped forward because no one else should in that moment. Her father had chosen to meet the man within and not the soldier at the gate. Rowan stood at his shoulder. Mara did not come. Vesperis lifted her head and exhaled slowly. "Welcome, my prince," Saren said, and it felt like a test and a mercy to say the words. "We have warmth and salt and bread. And dragons," the prince said, with something like wonder and something like anger. He looked older and younger than she expected. His face had not learned to be pretty to anyone. It would never be. It was a face that would always be thinking about the wrong thing at the wrong time and then say the thing that saved you. He turned to the heart of the yard and bowed deeper than anyone there would have asked him to, and when he straightened, his eyes were wet because the air was cold and not because he had ever allowed a tear its theatrical moment. Laymond was at his shoulder, less stiff than yesterday, which meant he had slept either deeply or not at all. When he and Saren's eyes met, something passed that was not alliance but was not. It was respect extended across a line drawn in ash. "What do we do?" The prince asked no one and everyone. There was quiet. The snow held its breath. "We do as men do when they find themselves in the presence of a sea and a wall at once," Talon said, stepping forward because his place was between. "We take off our boots and warm our feet and eat what has been made for us. And then we speak. And then we listen. And if the listening goes longer than the speaking, we will not pretend the lack of speech is silence. It will be thought." The prince looked at him for a long moment, his mouth twisting as it always did when he wanted to make a gaudy promise and knew better. He nodded, small, and the men behind him let their shoulders fall a careful inch because it meant something had not yet broken. Darion did not play. He stood in the shade and watched the colors move through the yard as if they were a kind of music after all. He saw Mara off to the side and Vesperis, who had placed her muzzle against the girl's shoulder with an insistence that made him swallow, because it looked like loyalty and he had forgotten what that felt like when it did not require a coin first. Brenna came out with a trencher and a grim expression that meant she would feed kings and then make them help with the washing up if they knew what was good for them. The dogs slipped and made fools of themselves on patches where the snow had become glass in the tramp. Saren moved toward the prince. Ashrith lifted her head and pulled in a long breath, and the rope between woman and dragon tightened and sang. The prince turned to her and his mouth did its thing. He started to speak and stopped and then did not choose any of the sentences he could have used to repair history. He said, painfully plain, "Was it you?" "Yes," she said, because he deserved that. And it was no one else. He breathed out, the kind of breath that makes a man's shape change in the air, as if the outline softened and sharpened both. "You chose swiftness," he said, not quite a question. "You chose comprehension. You made them understand you would not be spoken to like children. I chose to stop a hand that whipped in the street and told itself stories about what it grew in the garden," she said. "I chose what I could grasp. Men will tell you about Mercy. I will hear them. Don't think I will not. But if Mercy had lived in that house, we would not be speaking in my yard. I am not a stupid man," he said, with a kind of weariness that was also defiance. "I will not ask you to regret the thing that keeps you whole. I will ask you to regret some of the people who died. And then I will go and regret mine, and perhaps we will drink and not discuss it." She looked at him then for the length of time it takes for a cloud to pass over a low sun and for cold to bite the skin on your wrist where your sleeve rides up. She saw the lines on his face where laughter would live, long after he had any to spend. She saw something in him like a door left open, not carelessly, but because he had chosen to air out a room that needed it. "I do," she said. "I regret them. I see their faces when I pull my boots off. I am trying to learn their names." He did not bow. He did not reach for her hand. He looked at Ashrith and went toward the dragon as if toward a shrine in a faith he had been warned against and did not care. The dragon tilted her head and lowered it. When his fingers touched the plate of the brow just above the eye, heat came up through them and into his wrists, and when he turned his head to look toward the heart tree, the steam from the spring lifted in a little curl as if to greet him. He smiled, not because he was happy, because he had found, for a breath, a place where what he believed might not be wrong. Mara watched and felt Vesperis' thoughts move around her like the shadow of a hawk on a field. The dragon's attention was not jealous. It had no such human pettiness. It was interested. The prince smelled like salt and ash, like someone who has washed only with the most basic of waters and has not softened his hands in months. There was wood smoke in his hair where he had stood too close to a fire because it had felt so good to be close to a thing that could burn you without malice. The dragon sent Mara a sensation like the feel of a blade honed well, an edge you trust because it speaks plainly with your thumb. Yes, Mara thought. Perhaps this will not be a fool's hour. The hall could not hold the talk that followed. It spilled over in the yard like brine out of a cracked barrel. Corin took his place as he always did, at the edge and with no more than he needed to eat and drink, and watched the way words moved, the way some men could not stop their hands from moving when they spoke, the way certain women leaned their heads when they listened. He wondered how a house remade itself. He had watched Winterfell do it 100 times after a roof had failed or a wall had decided it had had enough of its stones. It was not made by decree. It was made by someone picking up a beam and someone else noticing and taking the other end. It was made by the refusal to let cold make a friend of you. When the first argument rose sharp as a knife held at the wrong end, a knight from the prince's retinue with a red-slashed cloak that made a strident color in the dun. Talon's voice came quiet and killed it more surely than shouting would have. "We will speak to the thing we lived," he said. "You tore down our keep's gate 2 years ago, good sire, because the man who held our daughter over the wall thought he could be paid in sheep and women. We mended it without killing you because you saw the sense in us. Men can learn. If you have come to learn, you may sit and be instructed by Winter. If you have come only to teach, be careful we don't put you in the yard with a broom to sweep the snow." Laughter followed, uncomfortable, some of it honest, some of it nervous. Layman's mouth jerked to suppress what might have become a grin. The knight put his hand on his cup and looked into it as if shame were a fish he thought might be in there if he were patient and didn't stir too much. You could hear the simmering of the kitchens and the scrape of wool against wood where a girl bent under a bench to retrieve a spilled spoon. Outside, in the godswood, the fog wrote slowly the script it had been writing for 1,000 years, and no man had yet translated it fully. The dragons stood as witness and breathed. Night again, later, and the candles gone to stubs, and the breath of sleeping men made a kind of cloud in the rafters that would turn to water and drop on someone's nose before dawn because the keep was old and given to inconveniences. Saren did not sleep. She sat on the cold floor of the solar with a fur under her and her back to a chest carved by someone who had loved the pattern of leaves for their geometry alone. She had a Shritha's scent in her hair and the prince's voice in her ear. He had said what she needed him to say, and he had not said what some part of her had feared he would. That absence was a gift she would not wrap in any other thing. Mara did not sleep either. She lay on her side on her pallet between the kitchen wall and the corridor where feet passed even at night, because there is always someone who has forgotten something, and she held her hand out into the steam that came up under the door from the bathhouse. Vesperis was outside, but the warmth traveled in strange ways here, and Mara let it run over her palm and the back of her hand and the tender tendon at her wrist. She counted her breaths and got to a number she did not reach most nights. Before she slept, she thought, "I will learn to sit on the high bone behind her wing, and I will keep my thighs tight and my heart slower than she tells me. I will not look down except when I must for joy." Layman dreamt of salt and of dragon's teeth and woke knowing that both were more complicated than men's talk had allowed them to be. He lay, blinked up at a roof beam that looked like the back of a fish turned upside down. For it had once been an oak, and thought, "I have been a man who took orders and gave them, and now I will have to be something else." He was not entirely sure he knew how, but he trusted his spine to teach him in the morning. Talon woke from the nap he took because men would not let him sleep as long as he wanted to, and sat with the map again and turned it so the north was not at the top. That trick had taught him more than any Southron knight's schooling. He thought of the heat that sat under his keep and the cold that wandered outside it, both of them parts of a system that kept his house standing. He thought, "The South may yet forgive us our fire if it decides it needs our cold." He thought, "That is a cynical thought, and I am a man who hates cynicism because it pretends to be wisdom when it is NLY exhaustion." He folded the map and went to stand under the stars. The stars did what they always do. They refused to arrange themselves into any pattern useful to anyone who had not already made up their mind. The dragons slept with their necks curled and their eyes half-lidded so that if a man came close with a knife and a hope he did not know where to carry, they could lift their heads and make sense into the world with heat. The prince slept with his mouth open because exhaustion had finally come and demanded payment in full and without ceremony. Corin slept with his hair making a black halo on the straw and dreamed of a warm spring that bubbled up in a field and made everything grow too quickly and then died and left bones that were not old enough to be beautiful. Just before dawn, Before the light that is not yet light but is no longer dark stepped shyly onto the tower tops. A scream split the yard. Not fear, but delight. A child had woken and looked out and told the truth in a voice too clear for anyone to soften. "Eggs," he shouted, "eggs," and ran in a circle because direction is something you think of later. The yard filled with the sound of boots. The Godswood's fog lifted as if it had made a joke it was proud of and wanted to see who had caught it. In the shallow pool formed from the overflow of the springs, nestled against a stone that kept its heat the way an old man keeps secrets, slowly and without apology, were 3 ovals the color of soot with sparks of silver in them like winter when the sun is cruel. They were the size of men's helmets and heavier than they looked. They steamed where the water washed over them and left little eddies. Vesperi stood over them with her head low and her throat vibrating with a sound so deep you felt it in your feet. A Shrith stood a little back, not to dominate but to guard, eyes bright. Saren came breathless, hair down, boots half-laced, and then stopped as if she had been thrown against a wall. The prince came a half-breath behind her and looked as if someone had given him a new language and told him he must speak it at once. Talon came last among the half-dozen who mattered in that hour and the 100 who did not, because there is something dignified about being late when it is right to be late. Corin pushed forward without shame and stood as close as sense allowed. "Are they?" Lamond began, and then perhaps remembered that words are not the only thing that can break a fragile thing and shut his teeth on the rest. Corin crouched, careful of his knees, and held his hand out over the nearest. Heat rose and rode his skin as if greeting a familiar it had not expected to find, and when he pulled his hand back, there was a small drop of water hanging at the root of his thumb where the steam had decided to mark him. "They are what they are," he said, harsh because he did not know how else to be. "And they are here. And this is not how it is supposed to go." "Supposed to," Talon murmured, and watched Vesperi sigh for a flinch that did not come. "We have been supposing wrong for a very long time." The prince laughed then, a sound half sob and half triumph because joy is always arrogant when it survives grief. "We will need," he said, "to put aside every story our grandfathers loved." "We will need," Saren said, "to make new ones that do not lie and are not cruel and are not just tidy because tidy is easy." "Do not make me a hero in yours," the prince said, gladness gone as quickly as it had come because he feared that as much as he longed for it. "Do not make me a villain either. I have no time for either suit. I will wear wool and call it enough." Mara stood a step behind and looked at the eggs as if they had grown from her own heart, which in a way they had. Vesperi shifted and looked at her, and the pressure of the dragon's attention was like the pressure of a warm hand held too long and not long enough. Mara thought of the spring where the old women washed their hair in summer with a slow groan of relief and did not care who saw. She thought, the world is happening here. She had always thought the world happened somewhere else. It pleased her perversely that she had been wrong. The men around the edge began to murmur, as men will, asking questions history will not record because history prefers to speak only with men sitting down and poising their pens. Who laid them? Are they the old ones, warmed? How do you move them when the water freezes? Do they sing? The sound of their questions made a music like bees when the hive is happy and will not be moved. Corin hushed them with a snap of his fingers like a schoolmaster, and then laughed at himself because a maester is not supposed to snap at anyone who can pay his keep. "Quiet," he said, "not because you must, because you have been given something that requires it." Talon looked at Saren, and she felt his gaze more than saw it. She nodded once in answer to what he had not said. She would do it. She would be careful. She would not let the South do what the South always did. Take a thing, name it, and by naming pretend to own it. The prince, standing in steam like any man who has just bathed, looked at the eggs and then at the dragons and then at the tree and then at Talon and then at Saren and then back at the eggs as if taking attendance like a careful steward. He raised his hands, palms out, not in prayer because this was not a god he knew, but as if to show he was empty of weapons. "We will not sell them or have men write papers about them that make them more theirs than they are themselves," he said. "We will not call them this grandfather's grandchildren. We will call them what they will answer to. And if they answer to the north, I will learn to love the taste of snow. Some of us," Laymond muttered, just loud enough to be an honest man. Already do. The world outside Winterfell kept doing what it had to do. The river broke and froze and broke again. Men in. The Riverlands swore and killed and agreed and killed again, and some of them lived to gather their grandchildren and say, I was a fool then, as if saying so made them less of one now. Women in the Reach picked herbs that had survived a frost that should have killed them and made broths that saved men they did not like. Somewhere in the Stormlands a ship went down with men who sang to calm their fear and not to amuse any god. And the sea took their songs and made them into a low churning that would keep someone from sleep in a castle for a week. The Faith burned a candle and wrote a letter that said, Abomination, as if the word had more power than the thing it named. A Sellsword in the far south threw his knife into a tree and told himself that if it stuck point first he would marry the girl, and if it did not he would go. Stuck, he went anyway. In Winterfell, the eggs steamed and did not crack that day or the next. The prince listened and sometimes spoke, and his men learned how to hold cups and mittens and how to find their way to the privy without swearing too much at the cold. Laymond stood at the edge of the yard and watched a boy try to climb an icicle and cut his hand, and he went and wrapped the hand himself, and the boy looked at him as if he had been made of something beyond leather and size. Brenna told two women who came in from a croft with baby goats that they could sit by the fire so long as the goats did not piss on the rushes, and when they did anyway, she clucked her tongue and said it was fine this once because even goats find change hard. Corin drafted a letter to Oldtown 3 times and tore it up twice and finally wrote, We are wrong. He stopped and smiled and rewrote We were wrong. Then he went to find Talon to ask for the seal and found him asleep in a chair, and left him there because mercy is sometimes the most active thing you can do. Saren took Mara to the high tower stair and had her sit on the sill of the window and imagine the wind. It was a mean game and a kindly one. When the gusts come, let them come through you, she said, voice flat with the necessity of it. If you brace against them, they will take you when you are not watching. Give, then take, then give. Learn the rhythm of something bigger than your lungs. Mara nodded, not to show obedience, but because the lesson had the ring of a tool that will not bend but will make your work easier if you learn where to hold it. She breathed with the wind and forgot to look down. She did not think of the Red Keep. She had not seen it except in other people's eyes. She imagined a house in flames because anyone who has baked bread has seen flame lick a loaf in a careless oven and knows you cannot save that loaf and must save the next one. She did not let sorrow into her chest in a way that would prevent her from living. That was not coldness. It was a skill. Night later, Darion went to the God's Wood alone because he had finally gotten warm and wanted to be cold again for a little. He stood at the edge of the pool and watched the eggs and thought of a woman he had loved who had not loved him and then had died of a cough that took her on a fine day and left him with too many songs that all sounded like the same one. He looked at Vesperis, who opened one eye and then closed it again because she knew the difference between threat and the rest of us. He did not touch the eggs. He did not kneel to the tree. He put his hand out over the water, palms down, and let the steam find him. He said to no one, I forgive you your beauty. He would not know if he meant the dragons or the keep or the snow. It didn't matter. Forgiveness is rarely that precise. At dawn 3 days after the prince arrived, a raven landed on the rookery sill with its feathers ruffled and its eye like a drop of tar, and the boys in the rookery said its name as if it were a dog they liked, because the boys gave all their birds names and told Corin the wrong ones on purpose. The letter tied to its leg bore a seal broken and remelted and broken again. Said, the hand is dead. It said, Wildfire has been found beneath 6 granaries in the city and at the gate of the queen's door. It said, rumors about dragons and oaths and winter run like quicksilver through the alleys. It said, boys throw snow at each other where they can find some, and men tell them to stop because snow is for water and not for play, and then let them do it anyway because play is for the living. The yard took the news in with a soft sound, the way a forest takes a small wind and rustles and then goes on standing. Saren read and reread and felt in her chest the thoughtful dissatisfaction you feel when something you wanted for a reason is given to you long after that reason has gone. She lifted her head and found the prince across the yard talking to Laymond with the intensity of 2 men who have learned each other's language and distrust it and each other still. She crossed and held the letter out between 2 fingers, because truth deserves a careful carrying. He read. He had the face of a man who has been told that the beast that hunted him has died in a ditch without his help, and he did not know whether to be glad, because that meant he had not had to do something that would have stained him, or angry, because that meant he would never get to prove he was worthy of a stain. He stopped his mouth from moving and simply breathed. "What we do," Talon said later, when the day had tried to fill itself with chores and failed, because chores only carry us so far when history stares at us, is what we have always done. We hold the wall against the weather. We do not ground ourselves in what is owed, because the ode changes every time a man wants it to. We ground ourselves in what keeps children warm. "And dragons?" Laymond asked, not contempt, not mockery. Genuine inquiry, which was more dangerous because it must be answered. "Dragons are children, too," Talon said, to the surprise of his own mouth. He had not known he believed it until he did. "They are old and they are stubborn and they burn their food and their friends with equal indifference if you do not teach them. But they must be taught. If they have chosen us, they are ours in the way a storm is ours. We shelter in it and we draw water from it, and we do not pretend it will not blow our roof off when we forget to check the lashings." Saren laughed then because the image was ridiculous and exact, and the prince smiled unwillingly because laughter is a road out of the cold room whether you built that room or not. Corin made a note he would later scratch out and write again better. Mara looked at Vesperis and thought, "Tomorrow. Tomorrow we try." They tried the next day, not stranger and not friend, not miracle and not daring, simply two creatures with bodies and appetites doing what they were fitted for. Saren walked with Mara to the yard and had her put her left foot in the stirrup tied to the great strap behind the dragon's foreleg, and had her swing up as neatly as a kitchen maid clearing a bench when someone spills something hot. Vesperis shifted as if to get more comfortable and then stilled because she had learned in a hurry that stillness is sometimes kindness. Mara settled and set her knees and thought, oddly, of the first time she had carried a pot too big for her arms halfway across a room without slopping its contents. She had wanted to look to see if she was doing it right, and had learned that to look was to ruin it. She looked ahead where the world opened. "Breathe," Saren said, and a Shrith breathed, and the lees in the world shifted and lifted, and men below shouted in jubilation they could not have repressed if you had promised them gold for silence. They did not go high. They did not go far. Vesperis took 3 strides and pushed, and the pushing became a different purchase on the air than on stone, and Mara was prepared to be afraid and discovered she could not find the fear, not because she was brave, but because the space between her and the ground had decided it did not need it just now. She breathed. She let the cold have her cheeks and the heat have her thighs where she pressed in, and the sensation of being exactly in the right place at the right time put tears in her throat. Vesperis banked gently around the yard, not to show off, but because a circle seemed an appropriate answer to this new question. When they came down, and the dragon's claws kissed the snow and took it like yes at last, Mara slid half to the ground and then stopped because she no longer knew whether the ground was the right place to be. The prince stood with his mouth open and his hands clenched and then relaxed and then clenched again as if he were playing a children's game with a pulley. Laymond looked as though he had tasted a fruit he had only ever read about. Darion laughed, a cracked, unwilling laugh that made men around him smile despite themselves, because it was a sound that admitted weakness without shame and joy without arrogance. Brenna wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand and said someone must have made the onions too fierce, and then told the boy with the sharp nose to get on with it and carry the trencher to the men with manners, and to trip anyone who thought they could step in the dragon's path for the sake of a story. The days forgot to hurry. The eggs steamed and were turned with care by Vesperis, and, sometimes, a Shrith. The great heads bent so that only a fool would mistake the act for tenderness and not power. Men came in and men went out. Messages were received and answered. The gods would spoke in its own way. The prince learned the proper way to sit on Winterfell stone so that your arse did not freeze your bones from that end. And he taught a boy a song that had come from the free cities that made no sense and had a good chorus. Laymond went with Rowan to the kennels and was bitten lightly by a hound who wanted to see if he tasted a fish. He did, and the hound liked it. Saren slept some nights, not because her body forced her to, but because she allowed it, and the dreams gave her a version of the Red Keep without fire, which made her wake grieved in a way she could endure. Mara's thighs turned to iron. Corin's hands went chapped and then healed so beautifully, He wrote a poem about the skin as a scribe for the world. When the crack came in the first egg, it was not dramatic. There was not a sound any of them had a word for later. There was a change in attention. Vesperis lifted her head and breathed a note that made the hair on the necks of everyone in the yard stand. And a Shrith moved closer. And the prince stepped forward and stopped when Talon lifted his hand and shook his head. They waited, and waiting is work. The crack widened with a deliberate slowness that felt like mercy. No rush, nothing forced. A fragment fell, and inside there was the fleeting shine of something wet and new and old. And then a head thrust, not angrily, but with purpose, as if it had been given a task and would do it and then ask for more. Mara did not breathe until the tiny throat moved. She thought her heart would break for the simple fact of it. Alive. And she shut her mouth because she had not asked to be made into something so tender that it took her knees. Saren put her hand on Mara's back lightly, because there was nothing to teach in that moment and she was not going to insult it by pretending there was. The prince whispered something in a language none of them knew for certain. Perhaps it was the old tongue of his house, or perhaps it was the language men make when they are quiet in the presence of birth. Laemond had to sit down because his head was going to go odd, and Darion put a hand under his elbow without making anything of it because he had fallen at the exact wrong time during a performance once and had to be held up by a girl half his S. Eyes while the audience laughed and clapped and did not know they had saved him. The tiny dragon shook itself free of the egg, and steam rose, and the skin was like the inside of a shell and then like stone, as if something had offered 2 lives and the creature had chosen. Vesperis lowered her head and touched it with the side of her muzzle, and the little thing butted back in a miniature of its mother's insistence. There were cries from the edge. Men who had told themselves they were not capable of or remembered they were. Corin began to say something and then, to the surprise of everyone, stopped, close-mouthed, and shook his head. He would write later. He would be precise. He would be wrong and then less wrong, and then almost right in a way no one would credit because men want poets to write poems and not treatises. A second egg cracked as the day waned, and the light made the steam into a wall of gold. Talon stood and thought, "This is not what I thought my house would hold when I was a boy looking at the world from a saddle I had no business on." He also thought, "Now we have work." He had the look he had when spring arrived and everything made demands that could not be denied or delayed. He turned toward the hall to call men to fetch blankets for the women who had been standing too long by the steam, and to tell Brenna that the little pig she had been saving for a feast might need to give itself up, and that she must not say, but tomorrow is better. Tomorrow is rarely better, and today is always what we have. He had taken 3 steps when a boy came running from the tower, breath streaming, legs too long, hair wild. He had a face that had not quite decided if it would be handsome or homely. He skidded to a stop and almost went to his knees and then recovered with the guilty look that meant he would not make that mistake again if he could help it. "My lord," he panted, and then got control of his mouth. "Raven, from the Riverlands, from the twins, the lords there. They say the faith militant has risen, with swords blessed and oaths sworn, and they say the Reach has sent." He swallowed. He had the look of someone who has been asked to carry more than his shoulders, and the news had been heavy and then too light when his body recognized what it was doing. "They say a host comes north to take the dragons by right of the gods." Silence again, that sharp quiet the north knows how to cut its bread with. The prince's face went very still. Laemond's hand went to his sword and then stopped because habit is useful until it isn't. Saren felt a Shritha's thought press into her like the heat of a fire you have come too close to and then decide not to step away from because it is winter and men are watching. Vesperis turned her head so one eye, large and containing, looked into the yard where men shifted and did not make a noise. The little dragon inside the shell made a sound like a kettle just before it sings. Talon breathed in and then out. "We will feed who needs feeding. We will listen. We will answer," he said, and the simplicity was an iron. He looked at the prince, and something passed between them that was not words but was not. The prince nodded once, like a man dignifying his own death before refusing it. He turned slowly and looked at the heart tree and the eggs and the women and the boys and the old men and the dogs and the dragons and then up at the sky, which did not care and therefore was honest. "We will not be taken," he said, as if explaining how men breathe. We will be asked, and we will decide. Snow very fine, then. The kind that seems to come not from clouds, but from the air itself learning to be something else and liking it. It settled on men's brows, and on the prince's shoulders, and on Ashritha's back, where it hissed away at once. In the yard of Winterfell, where warmth rose where it had no business doing so and old trees made faces at the sky, the world balanced itself for a moment on the point of a pin, as it always does before slipping toward whatever comes next.